My name is Sebastian Wells, and I've spent most of my life reading people. It's what makes me a great poker player. The flicker of doubt in their eyes, the nervous tap of fingers against the table, the slight hitch in their breath when they bluff. I see it all. I've built a career on knowing when someone is lying. But the one person I never expected to fool me was my own wife. Olivia and I had been married for 4 years. I thought we had it all. Passion, trust, a future. I was wrong. It started with the little things. Late nights at work that didn't add up. A phone that was suddenly always face down. That distant look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself I was imagining things. But then, in the middle of a high-stakes tournament in Vegas, I saw her. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be in New York. And she wasn't alone. She was with Ryan Davis, a man I once called a friend, a man I had destroyed years ago. And now, somehow, he had taken everything from me, or at least, he thought he had, because what Olivia and Ryan didn't know was that I had been playing the long game my entire life. They thought they were in control. They thought they had won. But they had no idea who they were up against. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I've always been good at reading people. It's what makes me a great poker player. The way someone taps their fingers on the table, the subtle twitch of an eyebrow when they bluff, the hesitation before calling a bet. These are the little tells that give everything away. Most people don't even realize they have them, but I do. I've made a living out of spotting them, turning deception into profit. Over the years, this ability has made me a fortune at the poker table. It has also made me wary of people in general. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. I rely on observation, strategy, and patience. I wait, I watch, and when the time is right, I make my move. And yet, somehow, I didn't see it coming when it was right in front of me. Olivia was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make every man in it forget what they were doing. She had that rare combination of beauty and presence, the kind that makes you feel like she belongs in the center of everything. She was confident, intelligent, effortlessly charming. She knew how to make people feel special, how to command attention without even trying. When she set her sights on me, I felt like I had won the ultimate jackpot. 4 years of marriage, and I still believed I had the perfect hand. Looking back, maybe I wanted to believe it too much. Lately, though, something had been off. Small things at first. A shift in routine, a slight change in her energy. She started dressing up more, even when she wasn't going anywhere important. Her perfume lingered longer than usual when she came home late. Her phone, which used to be casually left out, was now always in her pocket or turned face down on the table. I caught her smiling at the screen once, fingers gliding over the keyboard with a kind of urgency I didn't recognize. When I walked in, she locked the phone without hesitation and looked up with a perfectly innocent smile. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I had spent years sitting across from liars and thieves, training my brain to find patterns, to look for deception. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then the lies started. Little inconsistencies. She'd say she was working late, but her work calls would go straight to voicemail. She'd mention having dinner with a friend, but when I casually asked about it later, she wouldn't remember the details. Her stories never lined up quite right. She had an answer for everything, of course. Olivia always did. She knew how to smooth over doubts, how to redirect suspicion, and for a while I let it slide. Because the alternative, believing that the woman I had built my life with was playing me for a fool, was something I wasn't ready to accept. Then came Vegas. I had flown out for the Invitational, one of the biggest poker tournaments of the year. The air in the casino was thick with anticipation, the hum of whispered bets, the soft clatter of chips stacking against each other. This was my element, the place where I thrived. I felt at home in the chaos of calculated risk, the unspoken tension that filled the room like electricity. And then I saw her. Olivia wasn't supposed to be here. She had told me she was in New York all week, some kind of corporate conference that she absolutely couldn't miss. Instead, she was here, draped over the arm of Ryan Davis, a man I once called a friend. Ryan was a snake, the worst kind of gambler, the kind who never played fair. He had built his empire on rigged games and backroom deals, luring unsuspecting players into games they could never win. Years ago, I had been the one to expose him. I had ripped the rug out from under him, made sure he was banned from every reputable casino in the country. I thought he was finished. Apparently, I was wrong. And now, he had his hands all over my wife. They sat at a private high roller table, laughing as if they didn't have a single care in the world. Ryan leaned in close, whispering something in her ear, and she tilted her head back with a soft laugh, resting her hand on his arm in a way that made my stomach twist. The easy intimacy between them was undeniable. This wasn't some casual flirtation. This was something real. For a moment, I just stood there, watching. 100 different emotions crashed through me all at once. Anger, betrayal, humiliation, but I didn't react. Not outwardly. Years of training had taught me how to keep my emotions locked away, buried so deep no one could read them. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. So I did what I did best. I watched. I positioned myself at a table just far enough away to observe without being seen. I watched the way she touched him, the way he looked at her. I took note of the expensive bracelet on her wrist, the one I hadn't given her. I saw the way she leaned into him, the way he let his hand rest a little too low on her back. This wasn't a new affair. This had been going on for a while. It would have been easy to storm over, to throw a punch, to demand answers, but that wasn't my style. That was exactly what they would expect. An emotional outburst, a moment of weakness. No, if they thought they had outplayed me, I would let them believe it. Because the worst mistake a cheater can make is underestimating the one they're deceiving. By the time I returned to my hotel room, my mind was already working through the possibilities. There were too many ways to destroy them, but I needed the right one. Something definitive, something permanent. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted to make sure they lost everything. I stood in front of the mirror staring at my own reflection, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't about loss. This was about strategy. This was about setting up the perfect play, one they wouldn't see coming until it was too late. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. I didn't sleep that night, not because of anger or heartbreak. I had already moved past that. What kept me awake was the strategy forming in my mind, the careful arrangement of moves that would lead to the perfect outcome. I had spent my life reading opponents, learning their weaknesses, exploiting their mistakes. Now the biggest game of my life was in front of me, and the stakes were higher than ever. I wasn't just playing for money, I was playing for complete and total destruction. The first step was patience. I couldn't act yet, not without more information. A good player never moves too soon, never tips his hand before the time is right. I needed to know exactly how deep this went, how long it had been happening, how much she had taken from me, what Ryan's endgame was. People like him never acted without an angle. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife for the fun of it. He wanted something more, and I needed to know what it was. The next morning, I made sure to avoid Olivia. If she saw me in Vegas, it could ruin everything. I sent her a casual text, asking how her conference was going, pretending to be the oblivious husband. She responded with a long message about exhausting meetings and networking events, a perfect lie wrapped in just enough detail to sound real. I imagined her lying next to Ryan as she typed it, spinning her story while she rested against the man she thought could give her more than I ever could. I spent the next 2 days gathering intel. I followed them at a distance, watching their routine. They weren't exactly careful. Olivia walked through the casino with him like she had nothing to hide. They had dinner at expensive restaurants, went shopping at designer boutiques, drank at the most exclusive VIP lounges. She wore new clothes I had never seen before, jewelry that Ryan had likely bought for her. The way she looked at him made it clear she had already moved on from me. But what interested me more was the business side of things. Ryan wasn't just here to play around, he had set up a new operation, a private poker club hidden inside one of the luxury penthouses. It was invitation only, the kind of place where millionaires and billionaires sat around velvet-covered tables exchanging obscene amounts of money while thinking they were untouchable. Ryan had built his name on games like these, luring in high rollers, letting them win just enough to feel invincible, then bleeding them dry when they least expected it. And Olivia? She wasn't just a spectator, she was part of it. I watched as she worked the room, smiling, laughing, touching the arms of wealthy men, keeping them entertained while Ryan made his moves. She was the distraction, the charm, the bait. She led them to the table, convinced them to stay a little longer, to bet a little more. She played the perfect role, loyal, beautiful, and just unattainable enough to keep them hooked. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about betrayal. This wasn't just about her leaving me for another man. She had gone all in. She had chosen a side. And it wasn't mine. I could have confronted her right then. I could have walked up to their table, thrown my wedding ring at her feet, and watched the shock spread across her face. But that would have been too easy, too predictable. She would have recovered. She would have walked away with Ryan, laughed about it later, twisted the story into something that made me look weak. No, I needed something bigger, something that would make sure she had nothing left when I was done with her. So I waited. I gathered every detail, every conversation, every exchange. I made sure I knew exactly how they operated, how Ryan structured his games, how the money flowed through his system. I needed to know who his players were, who his contacts were, how he moved his earnings offshore. If I was going to take him down, I needed to do it from the inside. I started by getting closer. I let myself be seen, but only on the periphery. I made sure Ryan noticed me but didn't feel threatened. I let him think I was just another gambler, just another face in the sea of Vegas elites looking for a rush. I played small games, lost just enough to seem like an easy mark, let the right people see me, made sure my name started floating through the underground circles. And just like that, I was in. One of Ryan's men approached me the next evening, a slick, well-dressed guy with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Connor, said he'd seen me play before, mentioned that Ryan was hosting a private event later that night. High stakes, exclusive invitations, only for the best. He asked if I was interested. I smiled, took a sip of my whiskey, and pretended to consider it. Then, with the same calm confidence I had used 1,000 times at the poker table, I said exactly what I knew he wanted to hear. Wait, not? I'm always up for a little risk. It was time to play. The invitation led me to a private penthouse, the kind of place where money and power bled into the walls. Everything was designed to impress: the crystal chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the low hum of jazz playing over the sound of shuffling chips. The air smelled of expensive cigars and whiskey, older than most of the people in the room. This was Ryan's world, built on lies, greed, and the arrogance of men who thought they were untouchable. I was about to prove them wrong. I kept my demeanor easy, confident, a man with money to burn and no reason to worry. Ryan greeted me with a wide grin, all charm and faux warmth, like we were old friends catching up instead of enemies who hadn't spoken in years. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, offered me a drink, acted as if the past had never happened. I played along, matching his energy, shaking his hand with the same enthusiasm, pretending I didn't know what he had done to me, to my marriage. Olivia was there, of course. She spotted me almost immediately, her expression flickering between shock and calculation before she smoothed it over with a practiced smile. She looked at Ryan, gauging his reaction, and when she saw that he wasn't concerned, she relaxed. That told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't warned him about me. He had no idea I was a threat. The night played out like a performance, each person in the room slipping into their designated roles. The whales sat at the tables, throwing down obscene amounts of money with drunken confidence. Ryan worked the room, ensuring everyone was comfortable, keeping the energy high. And Olivia played her part, gliding between conversations, flashing that perfect smile, making sure no one ever wanted to leave. I took my place at the table, letting the cards dictate my pace. I lost the first few rounds on purpose, just enough to seem reckless, just enough to make them think I belonged here. Ryan watched me closely, likely remembering the player I used to be, trying to reconcile that with the man in front of him. He saw what I wanted him to see, a man who had moved on, who had money to burn, who was just another gambler looking for a thrill. I let the hours slip by, folding when I needed to, raising when the moment was right, never winning too much, never losing too little. I became part of the ecosystem, blending in just enough to be overlooked. But all the while I was gathering information. I watched where the dealers placed their signals, where the security cameras were positioned, where the biggest players kept their chips. I listened to the way Ryan spoke to his contacts, the little shifts in tone when he was discussing business versus when he was playing the host. And most importantly, I watched Olivia. She didn't approach me, didn't speak to me, but I could feel her eyes on me every time I moved. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out why I was here, what my angle was. She was nervous, but not enough to act on it. Not yet. She thought she was safe. She thought she had left me behind, that I was just another face in the crowd. She had no idea what was coming. The night stretched on, the air thick with tension, the clinking of glasses and the shuffle of chips forming a steady rhythm. I let myself sink into the game, playing the part of the high roller with reckless abandon. Ryan watched me closely, his sharp eyes scanning for weaknesses, looking for an opening. He thought he was reading me, thought he had me figured out. That was his mistake. I had spent years refining the art of deception, learning how to control my expressions, my movements, every detail of my presence. He didn't realize that every loss I took was intentional. Every hesitant glance, every sigh of frustration was perfectly calculated. The real game wasn't happening at the poker table. It was happening in the subtle exchanges between Ryan and his men, in the way Olivia drifted around the room, keeping the players entertained. It was in the carefully placed cameras, the whisper of conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. I had been watching, waiting, learning. Now it was time to move. I played into their hands, allowing my losses to pile up until I had built a perfect illusion. An overconfident gambler desperate to win back what he had lost. When the moment was right, I let myself seem frustrated, tipping my glass back and sighing heavily, just loud enough for Ryan to hear. He bit the bait instantly. "Rough night?" he asked, grinning as he leaned against the back of his chair, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I forced a smirk, shaking my head. Comes with the territory. I glanced at the pile of chips in front of him. "Somebody's got to be on the losing end." He chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "That's the beauty of the game, the tables always turn." I nodded as if considering his words. Then, with just the right amount of hesitation, I sighed. "You know, I hear you've got a bigger game running, something a little more exclusive." Ryan's expression didn't change, but I caught the flicker of interest in his eyes. He tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Where'd you hear that?" I shrugged, taking a slow sip of my drink. "Word travels. I figured if I'm already in deep, might as well go all the way." I met his gaze, my voice deliberately casual. "Unless, of course, I'm not the kind of player you're looking for?" He let the silence stretch, considering. This was the moment that mattered most. If I had miscalculated, if I had pushed too soon, the entire plan could crumble. But Ryan was predictable. He saw an opportunity to exploit weakness, to drag me in deeper. And sure enough, after a few seconds, he smirked. "You want in?" I let out a breath, like I was relieved. "That depends. You taking real players or just looking for easy money?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Come back tomorrow night. We'll see what you're made of." I grinned, shaking his hand, pretending to be grateful. But as I left the table, I caught Olivia watching me from across the room. She wasn't smiling. I spent the next day preparing, finalizing every detail. I had already gathered enough information to know how Ryan's operation worked. The private games weren't just about poker. They were about laundering money, about setting up players for carefully orchestrated losses, ensuring that the house always came out on top. It was a well-oiled machine, one that had taken him years to rebuild after I had destroyed his last one. Now, I was going to make sure this one collapsed just as spectacularly. By the time night fell, everything was in place. I arrived at the penthouse exactly on time, carrying myself with the same easy confidence as before. Ryan greeted me with a grin, ushering me inside. The game had already begun, the air thick with cigarette smoke, the clinking of ice against glass. Olivia was there, of course. She was perched beside Ryan, her dress sleek, her eyes sharp as she watched me take my seat. I offered her a polite nod, nothing more. If she wanted to speak, she would have to come to me. The game started slow, the first few rounds serving as a test. I played carefully, neither too aggressive nor too cautious, making sure to blend in. The other players were wealthy, powerful, the kind of men who had never heard the word no. They played with the kind of arrogance that came from years of getting exactly what they wanted. Ryan's men watched from the shadows, ensuring everything ran smoothly, but they weren't watching me closely enough. Because while I played, I wasn't just gambling with cards, I was gambling with information. With every hand, I was leading them exactly where I wanted them, nudging the game in subtle directions, planting seeds of doubt, of greed, of overconfidence. And then, at the perfect moment, I pushed all in. The room fell silent as I pushed my entire stack of chips forward, the weight of my decision settling over the table like a heavy fog. There was a distinct shift in the air, that moment of hesitation when even the most seasoned players second-guessed themselves. This was what I had been waiting for. The ripple of uncertainty, the flicker of doubt in Ryan's otherwise confident expression. He had spent the night watching me, convinced that he had me cornered, that he had cracked my strategy and was leading me exactly where he wanted. But now, with all my chips in play, he wasn't so sure. Around the table, the other players exchanged quick glances, their interest piqued. Some of them had been in games like this before, where a single move changed the course of everything. Others weren't as experienced, and I could see their discomfort in the way they shifted in their seats, the way their fingers tapped absently against the table, their minds racing with what-ifs. One of them sighed, shaking his head, and folded his hand without a second thought. Another hesitated, his fingers tightening around his chips before finally deciding it wasn't worth the risk. One by one, they backed out, leaving only 2 players in the game. Me and Ryan. Exactly as I had planned. Ryan leaned back slightly, letting his fingers tap against the felt in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He was thinking, calculating. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the mental gymnastics as he tried to dissect my play. Was I bluffing? Had I been setting him up all night? If he folded now, he'd save his money but lose face in front of the room. If he called and lost, it would cost him more than just chips. It would cost him power. And Ryan had built his entire persona around control, around making others believe he was always a step ahead. I have to admit, Seb, he finally said, a slow smirk creeping across his face. I didn't think you had it in you. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral, letting the silence stretch. I knew better than to fill the space with unnecessary words. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of it. Poker's a game of surprises, I finally said, my voice calm, steady. Ryan exhaled through his nose, considering. He glanced at Olivia, who had remained silent throughout the hand, her eyes locked on me with something unreadable. She wasn't just watching the game, she was watching me, searching for answers. I could see it in the way she sat, perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap when she was usually so fluid, so effortlessly composed. She knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't put her finger on exactly what it was. I had spent years with her. I knew her tells better than anyone. She was trying to decide if I was playing Ryan or if I was about to get played myself. Ryan's smirk twitched, just barely, before he forced it back into place. That was it. That was the moment. The smallest crack in his armor. He was uncertain, and in this game, uncertainty was lethal. He couldn't back down now. He had a room full of people watching, waiting. His pride wouldn't let him walk away. He pushed his chips forward, his grin widening. Call. The room tensed as the cards were revealed. My full house against his 3 of a kind. The moment stretched out, silent, then a quiet murmur rolled through the room like a slow-moving wave. Ryan's fingers tightened around his whiskey glass, his grip just a fraction too firm, though his face remained composed. He nodded slowly, forcing a chuckle. "Not bad," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Looks like luck's on your side tonight." Luck had nothing to do with it. Every move I had made, every hand I had played had led to this moment. I had been patient, waiting for the perfect time to strike, and now the first piece had fallen into place. But this wasn't just about the game. The real play wasn't happening at the table. Because while Ryan had been focused on me, his world had already started to crumble. I had spent the last 24 hours setting everything in motion. Ryan's empire wasn't just built on poker, it was built on secrets, on the careful illusion that he was untouchable. His entire operation relied on discretion, on the belief that no one was watching too closely. But I had made sure the right people were watching. I had spent years reading people, learning their weaknesses, understanding how they operated. Ryan had weaknesses, just like everyone else. He was smart, but he was arrogant. He thought he was invincible. I had fed just enough information to the right people. High-stakes players who had been burned by Ryan before, casino insiders who were tired of his presence, and most importantly, authorities who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the time this game ended, it wouldn't just be chips that Ryan was losing. And Olivia? She had no idea what was coming. She thought she had traded up, thought she had found something better than what I could offer, but she had made the same mistake Ryan had. She underestimated me. I kept my expression calm, controlled as I reached for my chips. Across the table, Ryan was still forcing that smile, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled slightly against the armrest. He could play it cool all he wanted, but he felt it. The shift, the loss of control, the creeping realization that something wasn't right. The beauty of poker wasn't just in the cards, it was in the psychology. It was in knowing when to strike, when to push, when to let someone believe they had the upper hand before pulling it out from under them. Ryan thought the night was over. He thought this was just another game, just another bad beat. But he was wrong, because in just a few moments, everything he had built would come crashing down around him. Ryan was still wearing that forced grin when the first wave of chaos hit. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention. One of the security guards at the entrance stiffened, pressing a finger to his earpiece, his posture shifting from relaxed to rigid in an instant. A dealer at the farthest table faltered mid-shuffle, his eyes flickering toward the door before quickly looking away, as if sensing something was about to go terribly wrong. I caught the movement, the change in energy, the way the air in the room seemed to thicken, the telltale signs of a storm rolling in. But Ryan? He was still watching me, still convincing himself that the only thing he had lost tonight was a hand of poker. Then the doors burst open. It was quick, efficient, and unmistakably deliberate. Men in tailored suits, crisp white shirts, and controlled movements flooded the penthouse, their presence silencing the entire room in a matter of seconds. There were no guns drawn, no dramatic shouting, just quiet authority. The kind that didn't need theatrics to command attention. The kind that came with flashing badges and cold, unreadable expressions. The moment they stepped inside, the entire energy of the room shifted, the easy arrogance of the high rollers turning to unease. I sat back in my chair, relaxed, waiting, while the rest of the players stiffened, their eyes darting toward Ryan. He didn't react right away, still caught in the afterglow of the game, his mind taking a second too long to register what was happening. But then one of the agents placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and I saw it. The precise moment realization hit him. His smirk faltered, his body tensing under the weight of the agent's grip. "Ryan Davis?" The voice was calm, professional, the kind of tone that told you there was no point in arguing. "We need to have a conversation." Ryan blinked, his mind scrambling to keep up. "What the hell is this?" He let out a dry chuckle as if trying to play it off. "Is this some kind of joke?" The agent didn't answer. Instead, he set a thick folder down on the table in front of him. It landed with a quiet but heavy thud, an undeniable presence, full of something far more damning than words. Ryan hesitated, then reached for it, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the contents, and for the first time all night, his carefully composed facade cracked. Inside was everything. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations funneling laundered money, records of rigged games, fraudulent business dealings, transactions that tied him to more than just illegal gambling. Years of secrets, carefully buried, now laid out in black and white for him to see. His fingers tightened around the pages, his jaw clenching as he flipped through them faster, as if hoping that somehow the next page would prove this was all a mistake. But it wasn't. It was airtight. The kind of evidence that didn't leave room for negotiations. "You've been busy," Ryan muttered, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. The agent didn't respond. He didn't need to. The weight of the documents spoke for itself. I shifted in my seat, enjoying the view. Across the room, Olivia had gone pale. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but I could see the slow-motion horror spreading through her, the way her breath shallowed, her lips parted just slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite form the words. She looked at Ryan, then back at the agents, then finally at me. And that was when she understood. This wasn't just about Ryan. One of the agents turned toward her. "Olivia Wells?" She flinched at the sound of her name, barely masking the tremor in her hands. The way she hesitated, the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. It was a dead giveaway. She was guilty, and they knew it. "You're going to need to come with us." The blood drained from her face. "Wait," she breathed, shaking her head slightly as if she could deny reality itself. I don't understand." The agent didn't so much as blink. "We have reason to believe you are complicit in financial fraud and illegal gambling operations. We have statements. We have records." He gestured toward the file still sitting on the table. "Your name appears in more than a few places." Her gaze snapped back to me, desperation flickering in her expression. She thought I would do something. That I would step in, defend her, explain that she had nothing to do with this. Maybe for the first time she realized what she had done, what she had thrown away. Maybe she thought there was still a way out. I just watched her, my face unreadable, my silence saying more than words ever could. She took a step toward me. "Seb?" I stood, straightening my jacket, gathering my chips with the same calm precision I had carried all night. Then, without a word, I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear Ryan snapping, his composure finally breaking. "Do you know who the hell I am? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" His voice was edged with desperation now, the smug arrogance long gone. "This is a mistake." "Mr. Davis," one of the agents cut him off. "We have a warrant." And just like that, his protests were silenced. As I made my way toward the exit, Olivia's voice followed me, sharp and desperate. "Sebastian, please!" I kept walking. She had made her choice. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt it. A quiet, settled kind of peace. The kind that came when you knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that you had won. By the time I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a cleansing wave. The city stretched out before me, its neon lights flickering, its streets alive with movement. Vegas was like that. It never slept, never stopped, never cared about the lives unraveling within it. People came here chasing fortune, chasing dreams, convinced that they could outplay the system. But in the end, the house always won. And tonight, I was the house. I didn't look back. Not when I heard the distant commotion inside, not when I saw the flashing lights pulling up to the curb ready to take them away. I didn't need to. Ryan and Olivia had played their hand, and I had made sure they lost everything.